I got all sorts of things I do to try to get in there. Like I do everything I can to get someone's contacts. I do everything I can to get someone. I sound like a stalker journalist, but I'm not. I get people's addresses. I write them handwritten letters. I keep on them. I just kept at it like 2, 3, 4 years. I kept at it and just kept asking them, asking and asking and asking. And eventually they either cracked or they had something they thought would be useful for me to see.
For those who are listening, welcome back to the Sunday Long Read podcast and a new episode of our Behind the Story series. Today, we are joined by Geoff Edgers from the Washington Post. Geoff, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's an honor,
I'm so glad that you are saying that. Have you read the Sunday Long Read before? I know that we featured your work before, so
I read it every week, and I think I'm a contributing something or other editor. I don't know. I've compiled it once, and I always nag them to ask them to like read my stories because it feels better to get recognized there than in like most places.
That's so nice of you to say. So you're a pro at this. You're a regular Sunday Long Read member at this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So today, we're talking about a recent article you wrote that we featured in the newsletter, I think a week or two ago, talking about this group of super fans of the Kinks, the rock band from the 60s. So just to start off, what is your kind of interest in the Kinks? Because you've written about them for years. Where did that interest start for you personally?
Well, I have a weird entry point, which is in like 2008, when I thought I was going through a midlife crisis, but I was only like 35. I made a movie about the Kinks, and you can find the clip of that movie on YouTube. It's called "Do It Again," and basically my original intention was the Kinks to me were, I love the Beatles, I love the Stones, I love the Who, but to me the great British band that never got enough credit was the Kinks, and they were special to me because while these other groups were like kind of writing about girls, basically, the Kinks were writing about like social issues, but not really in a way that sounds so serious like that. Like they were writing about like being jealous of this like kid in their school, or or like living in like a pretty hard place and wondering how to get out. They wrote amazing stories about how screwed up the music industry was, and they were just like a little off kilter. So my attitude was, look, there are a billion documentaries with the Beach Boys. Why not make one about the Kinks? So I met with Ray Davies, the Kinks leader, backstage. I presented this like sheet of paper. I had a friend who could make a movie, Robert Patton-Sproul. He was a film director. And I said, I'm going to do this. I'll be your great gift, Ray. And Ray was like, okay, yeah, sure. And then he like promptly ignored me for like 2 years. But I kept making the movie, and we eventually made a film. It played at film festivals. It got onto PBS and was like a great, exciting, I lost a little money, but it was like a great adventure and something I'd never done before. And it opened my world up to how to tell stories in a different way. I was basically the star of the film and the producer and the host and the crazy person. And I did all of those things. And then that came out in 2010. And I've just kept, there are some artists who like, they act terrible and it changes your view of them. But like Ray Davies, like he's an unpredictable artist who doesn't do things the way you want him to do them, but it didn't change my perception of him as a genius. So I've always followed the Kinks. So maybe that explains it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because before we were having this conversation, I was trying to remember what the top Kinks songs were. And I was looking them up and realized I know all of those songs. Whether or not I associate them with the Kinks, I know all of those lyrics to their top 10 songs. Because I think there is something, like you said, off kilter, maybe a little bit about the melodies, about the lyrics. There is something that is like kind of stretches through time with their songs a little bit.
I'm a child of the 80s. So like I got into the Kinks when they were these arena rock stars playing big bar chords and like doing like Come Dancing and Low Budget and these songs. And then when I got smarter, like turned 14, I went back to the 60s and I'm like, these guys, the Village Green Preservation Society, they're doing an entire themed record on like the Victorian era. It just was like, that opened my eyes. So to me, there are like multiple periods of the Kinks, which isn't even talking about the 70s. So it's like there's a lot of Kink stuff out there, you know?
Yeah. Do you think that was the appeal for other people who were huge fans, that they were doing something that was felt a little different at the time? Or what do you think the biggest appeal was?
Well, my editor, Amy, who's like a genius person, I was trying to ask her, I was like, why were the Kinks so popular in 1983? It made almost no sense to me. And why is Come Dancing a popular song? It's like, it's about like sort of longing for, I mean, really, Ray wrote it about his older sister who died tragically when she would go to the dance halls in the 1950s. And it was about like everything being replaced by like parking lots and supermarkets. But in the 80s, in 1983, we seemed to like that. It
Right.
wasn't like there was like this huge conservation movement, you know, going on to like preserve our past. It was like, let's erase it and look like flock of seagulls. So I couldn't understand it. And I asked my editor and she said she had just all sorts of stuff that I still don't know if I totally understand. But it was like the idea that, you know, these guys had a very British thing about them. They were like very like willing to embrace the oddness of their you know, of that history. And also, like, they were very much built for the MTV era. That Come Dancing video is a short film. You know, Julian Temple directed it. And, you know, Ray is in character with this mustache. And there are, you know, it's like, it's a classic MTV, like, let's tell the entire story of the song literally in 3 minutes. So, you know, that's kind of how I figured it out.
Yeah, I think that it is interesting. I'm forgetting if it was in the comments in your story that you just wrote or one of the fans said this, but talking about the visual part of them, that they had this like very unique look to them that kind of stood out. That would make sense if that was part of it too with the music.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Ray is an oddball. He's like an art school student, but he's also a rock star. But he also, we forgot the other thing. That was what Amy said that was really smart. Is like, he also like hooks up with Chrissie Hynde, like the coolest kind of pseudo punk, you know, Pretenders were amazing. And then the Pretenders record Stop Your Sobbing. Van Halen does You Really Got Me. There was a whole lot of, just a lot of good mojo going on there. It's probably the only time the Kinks had a lot of weird mojo that combined, because most of the time they were just sabotaging themselves so that they would disappear into obscurity again.
Right, which does seem like that's a trend, you know, with different acts and different bands. But so with this story, you're talking about this group of diehard, you know, super fans of the Kinks. What do you think in general super fans get out of this fandom? What were you hearing were like the main things that this group of people who have followed them for decades, what's the goal for them? What are they getting out of it?
Well, I don't want to sound like a cliche and say like this is community, but like I noticed an interesting thing over the last year, like or last couple of years. Like I did a big story on Geddy Lee, the lead singer of Rush, and he wrote this fantastic memoir. And he asked me to moderate one of his, what happens now with rock stars. Bono did this too. It's like, they don't just have like a book reading at like Book Soup or whatever. They like sell tickets and they have like 3,000 seats sold. I mean, Bono created an entire performance with songs and Jackknife Lee behind the thing and like a drama. But Geddy sold out the Orpheum Theater in Boston. I think it's like 3,000 seats. And you come in and you get a book and then you sit and he does a reading or whatever he wants to do. He didn't play any music. But what I thought was really interesting is like Rush is gone. You know, when Neil Peart died a few years ago, it just ended the band. And yet when these people came in, like I've never dealt with a crowd that was easier. Like I was real nervous, like, what do I do for jokes? Like, what do I do for introductions? But as soon as I said, you know, like comedians say it's an easy crowd. It's like, as soon as I said the first word, people were laughing. They were so happy. And I realized these people are like in the wilderness and they're desperate for that communal feeling that they got for years and years with this group. And, and if they can get just a taste of it, they'll go for it. And so like with the Kinks, it was like, I met a lot of fans. The Kinks did something sort of, I'm writing a book about the Police now, and the Police did a great, generous thing, is they reunited, even though they kind of didn't like each other and didn't really want to, but they reunited in 2008 and they played a bunch of shows and everybody got to relive that. The Kinks stopped playing in 1996, which is so insane. They played like a show at a festival in Norway. And then, the two brothers, Ray and Dave, are still here. They just never got back together again. So these people who loved the Kinks, who identified with them, the Kinks have an album called Misfits. There are a lot of misfits in that crowd. They've had nowhere to go, really. For years they had Ray and Dave solo shows, but those don't even happen anymore. So, I found myself drawn to this. I wasn't even thinking about going to this, this musical that was in Chicago, which is a thing I wrote about. But Marianne Spellman, who I'd say she's a super fan. After she graduated from high school, she spent 4 years on the road photographing the Kinks.
I think that qualifies, yeah.
and she just said, "Hey, I'm going to Chicago." And I hadn't seen Marianne for years. She had been really helpful when I was making my movie, because she's like, there's like super fan who's crazy super fan, like you don't want to be in an alley with that super fan. And then there's like Marianne super fan who's like crazy about the band, but super smart and not dangerous, as far as I can tell. And, I thought, why don't I go there and do this story? Why don't I see who's going and try to write about this, capture this kind of subculture?
Yeah, but you did hit on something interesting, that distinction between different types of fans, because of course people are getting different things out of it. It almost seems like someone who's a huge fan that would run into someone else who's a huge fan of this person. Like they together are like tapping into something that the rest of the world doesn't see. Like, oh, okay, you're seeing this too. You're seeing how crazy this is. And someone else is saying, yeah, I do. Like it's almost like a healthy conspiracy theorist in some way, who's recognizing that other people see the same thing that they're seeing.
Yeah. I don't really go to cover bands, but like, I went to see that thing that Michael Shannon does with, playing the REM, formed this cover band that plays REM songs. And I felt the same way. It was like, because they weren't doing like the top 10 REM songs. They weren't really a cover band per se. They were doing like Fables of the Reconstruction. Like they were doing something very pinpoint, very specific, and like something you could see the joy in people as they were playing these songs, because they weren't looking for like the big hit. They were looking for the thing that, tapped into something that was special, that made you feel like you had discovered them. I felt the same way when I saw Brian Wilson play Smile. It was like those people thought they would never see that thing, that album that Brian Wilson made with the Beach Boys that was like shelved and became this legendary unreleased album. And then suddenly he comes back and he's reconstructed it with his band and they're playing it. People were there and they were just like, I'll never get a chance to experience this. I never thought I would. It's something feels very special. I don't know if that's answering your question, but that's what I mean. It's like everybody's getting something different. And then you have the people who are like going to see Bruce Springsteen for the 970th time and are hearing Born to Run. And that means something. It's not like they're hearing and going like, boy, he's never played that before and we'll never hear that again. But it connects in a way that's special.
Yeah, definitely. How do you think fandom, of huge artists, or being this super fan, diehard fan, has changed over the decades? Do you think, fans of more modern acts, like you mentioned in your story, obviously the super fans of Taylor Swift and Beyonce and Beatles decades ago, but do you think that super fandom has changed, what that looks like, especially with the internet? Are super fans different today than they used to be?
Well, I think you can make a pretty interesting parallel with journalism and super fandom, maybe. And this is what I'd say. Or photography and super fandom. It's like, I don't know what happens with Beyonce or Taylor Swift obsessive fans. Maybe they win a contest and get to meet her, but I don't think so. But what's interesting to me about the super fans of the past is they would like meet their heroes. And sometimes they would hang out with them, and sometimes they'd go to dinner with them. It's like these two guys, I think I referenced them in the article, these two Frank guys, not necessarily guys I'd want to hang out with, but these two obsessive Kings fans. One was named Frank Lima, and another one was named Frank Rita. I know it sounds almost the same, but they're not the same. And they both believed they were the reason, they were the reference in Ray wrote a song called Rock and Roll Fantasy. And there's a chorus that's like, Dan is a fan, he lives for our music, sorry to sing. But they both believed they were Dan the Fan, and they were like willing to get on horses with jousts and kill each other to prove that. And Frank Rita's dead, so he can't really prove it anymore. And Frank Lima became like a very polarizing figure within the Kinks community. But this is a long-winded way of saying there are tons of pictures of those guys hanging out with Ray and Dave. They're like, and at one point when I was making my film, it was like I was trying to get Ray to come back and respond to me when I was trying to license it. And Frank Lima was like the guy who is my contact. He's like, Ray's backstage. Like, I'm going to get him to meet with you. It was like, who let these crazy people out? So I don't think that happens anymore. And when I say that about journalism, it's like, I was doing a story on U2, and it's like, I'm dealing with this nightmarish publicist who's like calling me on Tuesday and saying, can you meet with Adam on Friday? And I'm like, sure. And she's like, okay, you'll have to go to Ireland and have lunch. And it's like a very segmented time, and she's in control of everything. And then I'm reading the great Bill Flanagan's book about U2, and he's on like a barge with U2 in like 1986, and they're like going to some Greenpeace thing. Like all these people are completely immersed with their heroes as opposed to separated from them.
Right, definitely. So yeah, decades ago, there was more of a chance maybe that you could actually have a real life relationship with your hero versus today where, yeah, most people are definitely not having any sort of relationship with their idol.
Well, these people the three people who are not insane, but are super fans who I went to Chicago to hang out with and watch, as they went through this experience with the Kinks, it's like, they know the band. Like Doug Hinman, the guy who is one of the people there, he wrote a book on the Kinks, and every time any Kinks release is put out, he's like the definitive historian who they go to and ask questions to. And when I asked him for a photo, it's like he's sending me a photo of himself in 1972 at a hotel talking to Ray in the lobby. Marianne, tons of photos. They were connected.
Yeah. Do you think maybe with the internet, though, even if you're not going to have that real life relationship with someone, that you feel like you are because you have so much more information about them? You're in their life in like a different way than you could have been pre-internet?
Well, a lot of the artists have cut us out. And so they feel like they have a direct line of communication to their fans, it's interesting. Amanda Palmer, who is going through a lot of complicated situations because of this grim story about Neil Gaiman that was written, which was an incredible and difficult story to read about his alleged abuse of women. And Amanda Palmer, who was married to him and is being implicated in some way, but she has I'm watching, I'm on Facebook and I'm watching every day. She seems to be communicating, posting, playing shows, making statements, not about that, but about whatever she wants. So a lot of these artists have kind of cut out the middle person. And, sometimes you'll see an artist comment on somebody's comment on their thing, but I think it's kind of a one-way relationship, actually. I don't really think that these people have gotten closer. I think they've gotten further apart. They've been separated by technology.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Because you've been covering the music industry for many years but also comedians and other artists, through cutting out the middleman, do you think that you have less access now to some of these big names than maybe you did in the past? Or do you think that PR people are always trying to connect you? What do you think that access has looked like as a journalist?
Well, I don't know what the past was like because I wasn't there, but I can read about it and be like, boy, how did they get in there? But I also know for me, it's like, I got all sorts of things I do to try to get in there. Like I do everything I can to get someone's contacts. I do everything I can to get someone. I sound like a stalker journalist, but I'm not. I get people's addresses. I write them handwritten letters. I keep on them. I can say like some of the most memorable stories I've done. Did a profile Sinead O'Connor that really was special. Roseanne Barr. I went to Israel with her. I just kept at it like 2, 3, 4 years. I kept at it and just kept asking them, asking and asking and asking. And eventually they either cracked or they had something they thought would be useful for me to see. But most of those stories didn't involve any kind of hook per se. It wasn't like, boy, this person's putting out a book, album, whatever. It was really just my pursuit of it. I don't know what it was like in the past. I don't know if it was easier to just call someone on the phone and make it happen. But, I save like if I do a lot of secondary interviews. So it's like, if I'm doing a story on Pamela Adlon and I've had like a great conversation with Sharon Stone, like I'm saving that number and trying to work that for a story when I think it's a good time. It's just, they're all in my head. They're all on lists that I've made mentally, and I'm pushing for it. I will say that like, it's probably not normal how often I try to, I mean, it's just not, I don't think it's normal. I like to be seen as like professional, but pushy, I'm never like, I hope I never creep anyone out. And I hope that I never go over the line of like, this is too many asks, but like I ask.
Well,
and ask
luckily,
again.
right, you have that professional cover of instead of just being Frank the super fan, you're like, I'm a journalist, so there's a purpose for this beyond just being a huge fan.
Well, they also sometimes, I say to subjects when I start out and they don't always understand it, but then they eventually do. I say, look, you might wake up the next day and be like, I can't believe I said that, and just call me. Because like no story is like, if a story requires, or no story is built on like every fact, like there might be something that might be bothering you and we should talk about it and figure it out, because I'm expecting a lot out of you. I mean, Tiffany Haddish, I went to do a story on her and I knocked on her door. I went into her house and she was on the phone and she was talking to a doctor. I didn't really know what that was. I had my stupid, where's my recorder? This thing. Sorry. I had this, my Zoom recorder. I just popped record, put it on her table. And then it was like kind of clear. Eventually I started to realize it was like, she had like a miscarriage or something. It's like, it sounded really serious, but she had like recently had it like Friday and I was there on a Monday. So she got off the phone and I was like, hey, you okay? And she's like, yeah, I had a miscarriage, on Friday, but like, I'm fine. I'm like, well, you sure you want to do this? I mean, I've had people cancel for like no reason. And she's like, oh yeah, I'm fine. I've had like 6 of them, whatever. And so I kind of filed it away. And then as I was doing the story, motherhood and parenting and her own mother and all this stuff was like really playing like kind of a theme. Like she was talking about it a lot. It was really on her mind. And so when I got to the end of the story, I said, this isn't really answering your question about sourcing. But when I got to the end of the story, I realized I wanted that to be like the opening of my story. But I also didn't feel like it was that fair to slap a tape recorder on her kitchen table when I walked in and hadn't even said anything. And just like, so I explained to her. I mean, I remember distinctly explaining to her why and what it meant and how it would be presented. And I even read her that first 3 paragraphs, which I don't read stories to people beforehand because it's both an ethical violation and wrong. But I read her that and I explained it to her and she was like, I totally get it. And she was so happy with that story.
Wow.
So it's like, these things are just like, it's about immersing yourself in someone's universe and trying to explain to them what you're going to do. I just had a story that I did on the great Peter Wolf, who is, most famous for being Jay Giles' singer, but he wrote this incredible book. And it was a challenge. Like, he got aggravated at me when I would call certain people about certain things. He felt like he was really being like put in a tough spot. I think he got a false sense of what I was fixated on. And then at the end, he called me and he was like, thank you for that story.
Hmm.
I got to admit, like, I lost my ability to think about what you were doing, and I got very caught up in it, but I appreciate, what you did.
Yeah, that's always nice to have that outcome, and that feedback as opposed to the opposite. But what's interesting is being so immersed in someone's life when it's someone who's not in the public eye. Have you ever found that is more difficult to try and explain? It's someone if they're already known, they're kind of a public figure in some way, to be more open about sharing personal details of their life versus someone who maybe has never talked to a journalist before. Would you approach that differently? I mean, I know that you mostly talk to well-known people, but what does that process look like?
No, I mean, I would say that I don't want anybody to be surprised by something they read.
Yeah.
It leads to a lot of uncomfortable conversations, but I don't want someone to pick up the paper after I've talked to them or done a story and reported on them and be like, I can't believe he's reporting on that. Like,
Right.
if it's uncomfortable, you got to talk about it. So, like, for example, I did a story last year that I was really happy with. It was about this man who dedicated his entire life to building a stereo. He spent 30 years at it. He spent like $1 million on it. And so I had started this story actually in 2020-ish, I think. And it was part of this larger project we were doing called The Search for Sound. And I found this guy and I went to see him. He was in Virginia, Ken Fritz. And when I got there, he was about 80 and he had ALS. And he wasn't able to really even lift a record to put on his turntable after this, dedicating his whole life to this. Also, what I found, like, I had a sense of what that story is going to be, and it was very different for what it was. Like, my sense was, this is going to be a story about American ingenuity, and this man, like, dedicated his whole life to this thing, and, like, all the kids would be like, oh, Dad, he was always building his stereo. But in fact, it was about the sort of, like, trade-offs between an obsession and how to treat people, maybe. And, like, his kids a couple of them hated him because they'd been like, Dad never went to any games. I was always like painting walls and like insulating things, like, and then the guy was dealing with the fact that he had done all this, built his house basically around this stereo system, and he was dying and it was going to be parted out. Like, what was going to happen to it? So the point is, these were a lot of sensitive conversations with non-famous people who are never reported on. And so I just had to go back and back and back and ask people questions. Like, I called his son, Kurt, who they had a big fight one night. And Kurt said to his father, who was dying, I hope you die slowly. I thought,
Wow.
and I'm sorry, Ken told me that. The father told me his son said that. So I found Kurt. And I called Kurt and I said, Kurt, just got to read you this. This is what your dad said you said. By this point, his father had died. I mean, that's the other thing. This story took so long to do. The guy, he died in the middle, before it was even run. So I talked to Kurt and I told him that. I read him that quote. I said, can we swear on this, by the way, or no?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Okay. So I said, Kurt, I heard your dad said you said, I hope you die slowly. And he goes, it's not exactly right. I said, I hope you die slowly, motherfucker. I was like, oh, well, thank you for clarifying.
Well, and that's an interesting detail to add into the story.
So the point is, like, when that story came out, it was like different members of his family felt different ways. His daughter, who had been amazingly helpful to me, did not love it. She loved the story at the moment it came out, and then she read all the comments, and the comments were like, this selfish man only lived for himself, or like, then there are a lot of people who hate stereos and think people who like records are idiots, so that there was a whole legion of that. So like, she kind of turned her feelings on how it had come out, which I felt sad about, but there's nothing I could do. So, I don't know if that explains it, but like, I try to be as sensitive with a famous person as I'd be with a non-famous person. I just think you should follow the same rules. Like, I mean, obviously those people are more savvy theoretically, but like sometimes they're not.
Right. The same kind of personal protocols, no matter who it is.
Right.
Hey everyone, Amanda here with a quick intermission. If you're liking this episode and want more behind-the-scenes stories like this one, make sure to follow the Sunday Long Read podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever else you get your podcasts. You can also check out our website at sundaylongread.com. There you'll find original stories, our true crime newsletter, and of course, our weekly newsletter. You can become a Sunday Long Read member for only $5 a month and get early and exclusive editions of the newsletter. And now, back to the episode. Because you have also had this Edge of Fame podcast where you've talked to people like Norm Macdonald, which is amazing. I'm envious of that. But do you think that there's something you've discerned about famous people in any sort of way, that who they are kind of like in a more neutral setting where they're not performing? I guess they're still performing for you in a bit of a way, but do you think you've understood anything about what it's like to be a famous person in America through those interviews?
Well, I think what I believe is that everybody wants to, it doesn't matter if you're famous or not, but you want to be understood and you want to also be given like attention, and we're ego-driven people, and you want to be given attention and credit for the things that you feel like you deserve. And so I think what's happened is the way that things are done now, and there's some great profile writers and people who do amazing stories on people, but I think what's happened is like in our sort of like, we'll do a quickie Q&A in a hotel lobby before a show, before a film comes out or a TV show comes out or whatever. I think we've kind of gotten away from like the process of understanding what makes someone really tick and like what drives them to do something or make something. And so I think like those famous people really want to be taken seriously, and the way that they're taken, I feel like it's almost, again, this like borders in cliche, but it's like, I'm not really a shrink, but I can be a volunteer kind of moderator. And so, when you're doing a story and you're digging into things that aren't normally dug into, I think they start to appreciate it. Like I did a story on Dennis Quaid, and like I brought him a few other stories that day because I knew that when I went down to see him, he was just going to be like, oh, I'm sure this is just going to be, I talked to this guy for a couple hours and we're done. But I said, look, I can't possibly know you, even as a person, in 2 hours. And I certainly can't know a guy who's been making stuff for like 45 years and this range of stuff. And so we're going to be at it for a few more times. And here are stories I do. And he looked at it, he's like, oh, like, yeah. Like people don't do this a lot anymore. It's like that thing. I always hear that. Because I think people like this guy who did the Johnny Carson book for his whole life, Bill Zemi, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but I read every story he did. I mean, like, that guy would do like, he would go to like a couples massage retreat with Sharon Stone, and like who does that? He would be able to call up Johnny Carson on the phone and go to lunch with him. It's like they had a different relationship that was not built on, we're doing like a transactional quick hit thing,
Right. But by being able to do that type of story, do you find that people want to give you the amount of time that it takes to write that sort of story? Because the one positive of like a quick Q&A before a concert or something is that they don't have to be with you for that long.
That's true. And that is a quality. Trust me, after spending some time with me, you will understand that. I mean, I can tell that. I can't tell that during the process, but I can tell that after the process, because what undoubtedly happens is like, I don't know what the statistic is here, but like, I'd say like when I do a deep dive on somebody, I'd say 30 to 35% of those people remain friendly / text responsive / source open. Another like 40% immediately are like, I'm never talking to this guy again. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's done. That relationship's over. And then there's like the Jason.
That's a pretty high percentage, 40%.
Well, it's not like they're angry. It's just they're not like Jack Black.
No.
He's not going to respond to me again. Like I thought he might. I thought we had something in common, but okay, it's done. Jason Bateman is in the murkier 30% category of occasionally responsive, but generally not useful. Like maybe he'll make a comment about like the Dodger game, but like he's not going to help me get to Mike Myers. So I've made peace with that. So it's all over the gamut, and some like really like want to be like Norm, poor Norm. Norm wanted to be friends. Like he was like, "Are we friends?" And I was like, "Norm, we can't be friends until this story is done. So just like, I'll talk to you after this, but this is a subject we cannot address." And then after like a long time, I was just like, I can't really write about this guy in the same way that I could write about somebody else. And I just have to accept that. And that's how it is,
I can't even imagine being in the position where Norm is asking to be friends and you're like, I'll think about it. Give me some time.
I wanted to do the podcast and the story right. And Amanda, Norm would want to be friends with you. Trust me. He likes talking to smart people. That's his thing. That was his thing.
That is an honor. No, I saw the video that you did where you were hanging out with him during a Super Bowl. And that was in his apartment, right? But the crazy thing about where you both were sitting is that he had such a normal, low-key apartment. That was kind of part of his personality, right? Is that he was so down to earth that he had this just like very normal place that he was living.
Yeah, I mean, and I did that before I did the story. See, all these things are like little pieces you get. Sometimes you just do little pieces as you get to the bigger piece, like it might be a secondary interview to somebody that leads to that. It might be a short thing that you do with somebody. I mean, I know I did like an Instagram live with Pamela Adlon before I did a profile of her. I'm pretty sure. And so, yeah, Norm he just lived in, like, he didn't have a license. He lived near the airport. He had like a very clean kind of simple condo, but like Norm just wanted to sit in a chair with like his socks like on the floor and like watch golf, and like
Sounds
read
pretty
Tolstoy.
nice.
Like he just didn't have any other. I didn't think he did not want to have like a pool and a palatial estate. He just wanted to like go to his gigs and like write and read and hang out,
Yeah. Do you think that's rare in terms of the sum total of famous people that you've spent time with, that someone is actually more down to earth than you think? Or do you think it's the opposite?
I don't know. Most of these, like, everybody's totally different. It's like, Tiffany Haddish is like real easy to deal with and like a sweetheart. Like when I talked to David Letterman, like he had remembered that when I saw him one time, I had walked into a branch and like sliced my face, and I saw him like I got into a Zoom with him like a year later, and he's like, "Hey, how's that scar?" And I was like, "What? Oh, that." So it's like I just think like in general. You shouldn't let yourself. I mean, Paul McCartney's a really good example. It's like the Beatles, but if you talk to somebody on a level that shows that you have thought about what you're trying to say, that you're not doing the Chris Farley, like, hey, remember when you're on the roof and like there was a camera and like John had the beard, like if you don't act like a fanboy and you act like you're there with a purpose, like I almost never go backstage at shows because I don't like being somewhere without a purpose. So even if somebody I've written about says, "Oh, come see me after the show," it's like, I don't want to be standing in like Graham Nash's dressing room while there's like a line of people who really like, maybe they paid extra, maybe it's like their most important. What are we going to talk about? We've already talked about stuff. It's like, it's the wrong place for me. So it's like when I'm dealing with, famous people, if I can talk to them on a level where they know that I know something and I have a purpose and there's a reason, they're pretty down to earth and pretty normal, I find.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, would you ever want to go backstage for color for a story though?
Oh, I do that all the time. I mean, like if I have a purpose, I mean, I'll be a gnat, it's like, if I have a reason to be somewhere, I will be there. I mean, when I did a profile of Heart last year that I loved doing, it's like, I went to two shows. I had backstage access. I moved around. I was watching how people, you never know where you're going to see something or what's going to happen that'll be useful. So you just try to, I'm greedy. It's like you try to get every access point you can and just hope for the best.
Right. I mean, so it's interesting that you've done so many different mediums over the years, because obviously you write books, but then also you starred and produced your documentary, but then also the podcast. I mean, do you think that has been helpful in your career to be kind of a jack of all trades, jack of all mediums? And I also could imagine that that's necessary if you're an early career journalist now, that you kind of need to be proficient in, a bunch of different ways, not just one.
Well, I like doing it. It's like fun to do. Like it's fun to record stuff. It's fun. I just find, it's kind of how I view freelancing. It's like, I'm just so grateful I don't have to do video or audio as like a thing I depend on for money. Because even in my own universe where I have like I have a full-time job at the Washington Post where we have like this platform. It's like, it's really hard sometimes to mobilize our different departments to do something or to convince them that something is valuable and should be done. It's just hard. It's like we have a very specific sense of what we think is marketable as journalism, and it's the same as it was in 1993 or something when I got out of school. It's like, politics, the Red Sox, like crime, war, whatever. So it's like, sometimes it's a little bit harder to explain, like, look, I'm going on a 16-hour road trip with Fabio.
Right.
And we're going to end up at his property where he has a waterfall. And can we send video? And they're like, yeah. And so I end up with my phone shooting video of Fabio with his special prescription vitamin C water from Italy. And the video is incredible, does really well. And the story does really well, but it's almost like after the fact, they have to see it rather than proving it before the fact. But if you don't have the skills to do those things, I think you're going to limit yourself. That thing you were asking me about backstage, it's like walking into Tiffany Haddish's house and sitting and going to her kitchen and then just slapping the recorder down is backstage. Mm-hmm. And so, when I did a story on Jimmy Kimmel, it's like I was in his office and they just said I could sit in his office as long as I wanted. It was kind of boring. He was just typing. So I just said, hey, do you mind if I put this recorder here? So I put the recorder there and it was there for 6 hours. And when I went, and so what would happen is every 38 minutes, there'd be an interaction with somebody and I'd capture it. And then when I was going over the audio recording, I would see a blip and I go, oh, listen to that. And I found there were probably 3 or 4 cool things that I was able to use in my story. Now, I probably fell asleep sitting on that couch. And if I'd been there for 6 hours and been with a notebook ready, it would have been a different thing. People.
Oh, yeah.
So definitely. I guess you just got to know how to use the tools. I learned so much doing that podcast because it was a collaboration with WBUR and this amazing woman, Jess Albert, who I did it with, and the Post. And just learning how to, when you do radio or you do TV, learning how to write differently. It's like that Anthony Bourdain thing where the script might just have a sound on it. And, mm-hmm. and when you try to overwrite it or you try to, have someone who doesn't have any audio first experience edit a podcast, sometimes they punch in all this stuff and it sounds awful. And so you really learn how to tell the story differently. And I just love, storytelling is the best thing in the world.
Yes.
How can you get paid to do this thing? And so I just want to have all the tools available.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also find that you appreciate the other cogs of the machine a little bit too. If I take my own photos for a story or now doing this podcast, you appreciate the people who this has been their main thing for their careers.
They're experts, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so what do you have up next? When you're picking your next stories, what are you typically looking for?
Well, I won't tell you what the stories are because I'm an old person and I do not believe. I was doing this story on Roseanne and I was in Israel and she had this like rabbi. You should look him up, Rabbi Shmuley. He's a thing, and he was like kind of like had brought her there. He wrote a book called Kosher Sex, and
No.
I have an odd. My religious upbringing is conservative Jewish, but I sometimes find myself when I'm in religious situations breaking into a massive sweat. And
Right.
I would call myself non-religious. But I'm with Rabbi Shmuley at the Western Wall, and he's like, come on, let's go pray. And I'm like, I don't really know how to pray, but thanks, I'm okay. So he runs me over to this stand to get the tefillin. You know what those are?
No.
They're like these little, you wrap them around your arms and they have a little prayer box in them. It's like super Orthodox people.
Okay, gotcha.
So he like makes me go over there and he wraps this tefillin around my arm. Then he has the guy wrap one around my head. I've got this giant block, coming off my head full of the Bible. And he runs me over to the wall. And then I'm like, look, it's fine. I was just trying to be tolerant. I was like, it's fine. Just no pictures. Okay. And so I do all this stuff and then I get back to my room and all over Facebook are pictures of me in this prayer with Rabbi Shmuley with Roseanne tagged. And I'm just like, and the thing that made me want to take that down more than my confusion about religion was I do not want a story getting out there before it's published. I mean, maybe I'm paranoid, maybe I'm silly, but like it's a process. And so sometimes like we'll have a photographer come and shoot somebody and they'll immediately throw up the subject on Instagram and I'll be like, yo, like do what you want when that's published, but not now, please. Like, I don't want people knowing about it. I'm sure the New York Times isn't like, boy, what's that Geoff Edgers guy working on? But
Mhm.
like, I just don't like it. So what I'm saying to you is not to be rude, but I try to keep stories going in my head that are varied. So I have two stories. One of them is about an actor. One of them is about a musician. And then another one is about a completely different thing involving the orchestra world that is like more of a newsy investigative story.
Hmm.
Those are the three stories. And, I've been working on the last one that I just mentioned for a while. The other two I'm just poking at, and I know that they're on the horizon. So I hope by the end of the summer, all three will publish so that they'll have some impact,
Definitely. Do you think part of that uncomfortability of someone posting a photo of you while you're reporting or something like that is that you're uncomfortable being the story instead of reporting the story? I mean, at least I know for me personally, I could see other journalists where that happens. It's a different feeling when you're not the one asking the questions, that you're the focus of someone else.
No. I don't feel uncomfortable I don't feel uncomfortable publicly. And, a couple times I'm trying to think of a couple good examples, but like even in the Kink story, I put like a paragraph in about myself because I felt like I had made this movie and whatever, and it was connected.
Right.
And my editor, Amy, was like, this is a really good author's note that we'll do, but we're yanking it out of the story. I try to almost never do things first person, but I have done it before, and it's worked. Mainly because when it hasn't worked, I've been told by a smarter editor, "Don't do this." And
It's a
when
hard
it,
it's a hard line, yeah, because there is that stern journalism backbone of no first person.
I don't like. I love when I mean, I try not to ask. I don't ask celebrities for stuff. You know what I mean? Like I don't. I always feel like there's like this breed of journalist who like is always posing for pictures first. And so sometimes I'm a little bummed out that
Mhm.
I don't have any pictures, but like sometimes like Eddie Murphy, when I was interviewing him, like his assistant's like, "Hey, why don't you get a picture?" And I was like, "All right." I did the,
Yeah,
but
you're just
I
not.
was psyched to be in a picture with Eddie Murphy, but I wasn't instigating it. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and when I did a story on Dick Van Dyke, they had like their own photographer like snapping like 100 photos while I was sitting there. And then I've been trying for like 7 years to get her to give me one. I don't know how to get her to acknowledge me. It's like she's too busy. But I mean that'd be awesome to have a picture of me with Dick Van Dyke. I mean I really appreciate the experiences. They're special. They're like, Sinead O'Connor allowed me to drive her from San Francisco to Los Angeles and take her to the In-N-Out Burger. I mean, these are special experiences with
Mhm.
people who, as I was growing up, I'm doing this story on the Police, this book on the Police. It's like when I was 13 years old, that was my favorite band. It's like the idea that I could actually speak with them and ask them real questions is just remarkable on one level to me.
Yeah, definitely.
So no, I'm not like, I don't mind being in the story. I would mind being in the story if I altered it in any way, or like if my presence like changed it in a way, because that's not really what my job is. But I don't mind being like, I'm here doing it,
So essentially, you want to be 1% of the story. If
Yeah, or
you could work in one paragraph of first person, then that's ideal.
Yeah, that's, I mean, like I read Taffy stuff all the time. And it's like, first of all, I'm just jealous of her, like, because she's so brilliant. But it's like I read so many people who are able to be part of a situation. And like sometimes I can't figure out if the reason I don't do that is because I don't feel like I'm important enough to be part of that. Or maybe it's just my style. It's, like when I talk to people usually about doing a story and they're like, why do you have to talk to all these people? Why do you need more time? I'm like, look, I'm not a great writer. Like I'm just doing the best I can here. I need the material. If I don't have the material, it's not going to be a great story. And your story needs to be like the best story ever written about you. So that's why. I'm sorry.
Right,
That's really what I say to him.
Yeah.
And I believe it. Like I really think that.
And definitely. No, I completely agree that, I mean, good journalism can't just come from no reporting. That writing has to come from some sort of source.
It's got to come from over-reporting to me.
Yeah.
Like I want to get to the point where I've had this, like I have to cut people who are famous because they're not good secondary interviews.
Right.
And leave other people in who are awesome.
Right.
It's like, it's just, I want to have too much, not too little.
Right. Right. The ideal situation is that, yeah, you're cutting a big name at the end.
Right.
Well, Geoff, thank you so much. We will look out for your mysterious stories that come out, and hopefully we can have you on the podcast again to talk about any of them that end up coming out.
Anytime. I love talking about writing, and I really enjoyed talking to you, Amanda.
This episode of the Sunday Long Read podcast was produced by Matthew Whitehurst and me, Amanda Ulrich. The co-founders of the Sunday Long Read newsletter are Jacob Feldman and Don Van Natta Jr. Until next time, thanks for listening.